Greetings, Thrillseekers. I am the Master Programmer, Curator of Forbidden Knowledge. Today, I bring you 3 chilling stories unearthed by Beowulf, our intrepid guide into the dark and mysterious. This time, we delve into ancient ruins where time, reality, and sanity unravel. So, if you're looking for a fright, something scary to watch at night, stay with us as we delve into these 3 extraordinary tales. First, in the Chronos Cradle, a team of archaeologists discover a ruin where time itself is warped and broken. What begins as a scientific investigation turns into a desperate fight for survival as the past, present, and future collide. Next, in Obsidian Voices, an elite military squad stumbles upon an unmarked site in the desert. What lies beneath is no ordinary ruin. It's a gateway to madness, where the whispers of an eldritch force drives the team to the brink. Finally, in the Echo Chamber, a group of explorers venture into an Amazonian cave system rumored to hold ancient secrets. They discover a cavern that doesn't just echo sound, it steals their voices, their minds, and their very souls. These stories are not for the faint of heart, so sit back, turn down the lights, and listen to the eerie tales Beowulf has uncovered. And if you enjoy our content, please subscribe to our channel for more chilling stories and dark discoveries. Welcome to another journey into the unknown, brought to you by the Dark Files. The Chronos Cradle was a name whispered by locals, not with fear, but with resignation. Deep in a forest where even moss grew slowly, a perfect circle of blackened stone pillars jutted from the earth. Dr. Elena Markov and her team of archaeologists didn't believe in curses or folk tales, they believed in science. When they arrived at the site, the first thing they noticed was the air. It was heavy, thick with an unexplainable humidity. Time seemed to blur as they worked. Hours slipped by unnoticed, leaving them with fewer daylight hours than they'd expected. They wrote it off as exhaustion and pushed forward. By the second day, they uncovered a trap door, a slab of iron engraved with swirling, hypnotic patterns that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. It was far heavier than its appearance suggested, taking their strongest tools and hours of effort to budge it. Beneath was a spiral staircase descending into the earth. The first to descend was Victor, the team's photographer. He carried the gear and joked about being the first man to enter the underworld. When he emerged from the cavern an hour later, his face was pale and his hands were trembling. "It's bigger than it looks," was all he could say. Elena led the rest of the team down. The cavern was massive, its walls lined with shimmering crystalline formations that reflected light in impossible patterns. In the center stood a monolithic hourglass, easily 10 feet tall, its sand falling impossibly fast despite the cavern's still air. The first sign of trouble came that evening. Lila, one of the researchers, cut her hand while handling equipment. It seemed minor at first, but within an hour, the cut had reddened, swelled, and begun to fester. By the time the team realized something was wrong, Lila was feverish, her veins darkening as though the infection had weeks to spread instead of mere hours. "We need to get her to a hospital," Elena ordered, but the forest seemed different as they carried her back to the vehicles. The path they had marked were gone, overgrown with plants that hadn't been there that morning. It took them twice as long to reach the camp, and when they finally arrived, the vehicles wouldn't start. By the time the sun had set, Lila was dead, her body already beginning to decompose. Then they noticed Victor. He was sweating profusely, and it looked as though his face had aged, deep lines carved into his skin, his hair graying at the temples. "I feel off," he muttered before collapsing. When they rolled up his sleeves to take his pulse, his veins bulged, and the skin beneath his arm had taken on a sickly pallor, almost translucent. It dawned on them. Time wasn't normal here. It was moving faster. Weeks, perhaps months, in a single day. The trapdoor wasn't a portal to the past or the future. It was a wound in the fabric of time, and they had disturbed it. In desperation, Elena returned to the cavern, convinced the hourglass held the key to their survival. She touched its surface, hoping to slow the falling sand. But the moment her fingers grazed the glass, the sand stopped falling entirely, and the cavern erupted in chaos. The crystalline walls darkened, reflecting twisted, older versions of herself and her team. Emaciated, scarred, skeletal. The sand inside the hourglass began to flow backward, and Elena screamed as she felt her own body shift. Pain racked her as her joints stiffened and her vision blurred. She staggered out of the cavern, only to find her remaining team members barely recognizable, aged decades in minutes. By the time she made it back to the surface, the cradle looked entirely different. The stone pillars had crumbled to dust, and the forest around her had become an overgrown maze. Her hand shook as she realized her once black hair was streaked with gray. Elena was found days later by a search party, her body ravaged by time. Medical examinations estimated her biological age to be nearly 80, though she was only 37. She refused to speak about what happened at the cradle, her mind fragile and her memories fractured. The site has been declared off-limits, surrounded by warnings of hazardous radiation, but locals know the truth. They say time itself moves differently there, and if you venture too close, you'll find yourself aging faster than you can escape. Codenamed Operation Mirage, the mission tasked Captain Grayson and his unit with securing an uncharted ruin deep in the desert. Intelligence suggested insurgents were using the site as a weapons cache. The team, seasoned and prepared for anything, arrived under the cover of darkness. The ruin stood in a lifeless stretch of desert, a jagged circle of black stone formations that seemed almost alive. As the soldiers approached, their boots sank into the sand, but it wasn't the usual gritty texture. It felt damp, almost fleshy.
"Command, we're on site,"
Grayson said into his radio, but all he got back was static. The entrance to the ruin was a narrow fissure in the rock, leading to a spiral descent. As they moved deeper, the temperature dropped, and the air grew dense with an unidentifiable odor, like burnt ozone and decayed vegetation. When they reached the main chamber, the team froze. The center of the room held a massive structure, a twisting, asymmetrical mass of translucent material that pulsed faintly with an inner light. It was neither stone nor glass, more like an organic crystal, constantly shifting in color and texture. Surrounding it were countless spires of the same material, stabbing into the ground like roots. Private Kowalski stepped closer, his flashlight reflecting off the crystalline mass. As the light hit it, the surface rippled, and something moved inside. Cap, this thing's moving," Kowalski said, his voice trembling. Before Grayson could respond, the chamber darkened. A low-frequency hum filled the air, vibrating their very bones. The crystalline structure began to glow, and from its depths emerged something horrible. They weren't humanoid. They weren't even animalistic. They were forms that defied logic and comprehension. Shifting masses of tentacles, spirals, and eyes that blinked and opened in impossible places. Their edges seemed to blur and ripple, as if they were not fully in this dimension. The first soldier screamed when one of the creatures reached out with a tendril-like appendage. It didn't touch him. It simply hovered near his head, and he dropped to the ground, convulsing. His helmet rolled off, revealing his face contorted into an expression of pure terror, his eyes milky white. "Open fire!" Grayson shouted. Bullets tore through the air, but the creatures didn't react. Instead, the rounds passed through them as if they weren't there, or worse, as if they existed in a space bullets couldn't reach. The hum grew louder, and suddenly the creatures began to change. One grew impossibly large, filling the chamber with its twisting mass. Another shrank into a concentrated point of light that emitted a searing heat. The third dissolved into a swarm of tiny, glimmering fragments that swirled around the soldiers, slicing into their gear and skin like microscopic blades. Grayson grabbed his remaining men and ordered a retreat, but the passage they had entered through was gone, replaced by a maze of spiraling tunnels that seemed to shift and reconfigure with every step. The squad descended into chaos. Kowalski screamed as his own reflection reached out from the wall, gripping his arm and dragging him towards the shimmering surface. The others watched in horror as he vanished, leaving only his gear behind. Grayson tried to keep control, shouting orders, but the screams of his squadron drowned him out. The soldiers turned on each other, accusing one another of being monsters. Fists and bullets flew, but the real enemy was the ruin itself. Grayson, clutching his rifle, stumbled into a narrow tunnel and emerged into the open desert. The ruins were gone, replaced by a barren expanse of sand. He was alone. The military buried the incident, labeling it as environmental exposure. But Grayson knew the truth. The crystalline structure, the creatures, the way time itself seemed to dissolve. All of it was too real, and it was still there, buried, somewhere under the sands. The expedition began as a routine exploration. Dr. Isabel Moreno, an ambitious anthropologist, was leading her team into the heart of the Amazon to study an uncharted cave system, rumored to hold ancient carvings. The cave's entrance was hidden behind a dense wall of vines, its mouth yawning like a predator awaiting its prey. The air inside was unnaturally cool, carrying a faint metallic tang that made the team uneasy. As they ventured deeper, they noticed the walls shimmering faintly, as though coated with a translucent film. When Isabel shone her flashlight directly on the surface, she froze. The walls weren't smooth. They were covered in countless carvings, but not of animals or gods. Instead, they were human faces. Each face was contorted in an expression of agony, mouths open as if caught mid-scream. "Probably ceremonial," Isabel murmured, more to herself than her team. She brushed her hand over one of the faces and recoiled. The surface was warm, pulsing faintly like living flesh. The team pressed on, their unease mounting. The tunnel opened into a massive chamber, its walls lined with the same carved faces. At the center stood a towering obelisk of black stone, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen. When Isabel approached, her reflection didn't match her movements. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Her reflection stared back, but instead of mimicking her, it grinned. A small, unnatural smile that spread too far across its face. One of the team members, Luis, touched the obelisk out of curiosity. The chamber instantly erupted in sound. Voices filled the air, a cacophony of screams, laughter, and whispers in languages no one recognized. "Turn it off," Luis yelled, clutching his ears, but there was nothing to turn off. The sounds grew louder, more distinct. Isabel realized they weren't random. They were their own voices, Fragments of past conversations, fears they'd never spoken out loud, and thoughts they couldn't even admit to themselves echoed back at them. One by one, the team succumbed to the chamber's influence. Luis fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Make it stop," he screamed, but his own voice answered, mocking him. His body stiffened, his mouth froze in mid-scream, and he became part of the wall, another face added to the twisted gallery. The chamber's voices grew more sinister, shifting from echoes of the team's words to mocking them, taunting them with secrets they had never shared. Isabel tried to lead the remaining team members back to the entrance, but the tunnel had disappeared. The chamber twisted around them, the walls pulsing and closing in. The faces began to whisper directly to Isabel, calling her name in 100 different voices, some familiar, some alien. In a last-ditch effort, Isabel turned to the obelisk and screamed, "What do you want?" The voices stopped, replaced by a deep, guttural hum. From the obelisk emerged a figure, amorphous and shifting, its surface reflecting the faces of everyone who had ever entered the chamber. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its very presence radiated an incomprehensible terror, showing Isabel glimpses of countless lives it had consumed and the void it had come from. Isabel's mind fractured. She fell to the ground, her reflection now grinning back at her from every surface. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our page to stay updated. Stay vigilant. The unknown is always closer than you think.